this is really the new decade for Japan. Startups only really have become a thing over the last 10 years is because young people have decided not to go for this system anymore. If they would, there would just not be supply.
Beaming in from Tokyo is Pieter Franken, who's the managing director of GFTN Japan. Now, this episode, as I said, a special episode, it's actually intended to showcase the Japan FinTech Week and the GFTN Forum in Japan, which is around the corner.
I think the GFTN Forum in Japan is the event to bring the entire finance and technology world in Japan together with the global audience. Japan has the most forward-looking regulations in digital assets of any country. In Japan, shrines are actually quite innovative. They're innovation centers. If you go to a lot of shrines, you will see there's all kind of entrepreneurial things happening on this side.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining me on this very special episode. Joining me, or should I say beaming in from Tokyo, is Pieter Franken, who's the managing director of GFTN Japan. Now, this episode is, as I said, a special episode. It's actually intended to showcase the Japan FinTech Week and the GFTN Forum in Japan, which is around the corner. But more importantly, let me start with welcoming Pieter. Pieter, welcome to the Couchonomics with Arjun show. Unfortunately, we don't have you on the couch, but hopefully you're on a virtual couch.
Yes, Arjun, thank you so much for having me today. It's an honor to be on the virtual couch. I know that a couple of weeks from now we will be sitting together on a real couch here in Tokyo. But everybody, thank you for tuning in, and it's a pleasure to talk about what we're going to do here in Tokyo in early March.
So Pieter, I've got this question. You're Dutch, from what I remember when I met you last year in Tokyo. You told me you're from Holland. But you've been in Japan for a long time, right? Give us a little bit of the backstory here.
Yes. So, sometimes I tell people I'm half Japanese, and obviously I don't look like it. But I came here about more than 35 years ago at that time as a student. And then after I got my master's degree from Delft University in computer science, I joined Hitachi Central Research Laboratories here in Tokyo. As a researcher at that time. Interestingly enough, this is 1990. Interestingly enough, I was a researcher in the field of AI applied to silicon and parallel computing. 35 years later, this is what everybody's talking about right now, but I can tell you at that time, it wasn't a great pickup line. And I started my life in computer science as a researcher. I then, through, kind of more or less serendipity, I landed a job in Citibank, where I joined the technology and operations team. I worked there till 2000, where it was a great time. A lot of innovation happened there. And then I joined Shinsei Bank as the CTO for about 10 years. And we did tremendous amount of innovation here in the industry here. That's also where a lot of pioneering happened at Shinsei Bank. And 2010 onwards, I became the CTO for Monex Group here. Some of you may know Monex Group for CoinCheck, which is one of the largest crypto exchanges here, but Monex very much is one of the largest security retail brokers in Japan. My connection to what we're going to talk about today is about 10 years ago. I became an advisor to MIS in Singapore around the fintech, ambitions of Singapore. I've been involved ever since. I've been kind of more or less pulled into that more and more, including supporting some of the platforms that were built, but also the Singapore FinTech Festival. And more recently, about 3 years ago, when Singapore FinTech Festival became Elevandi, I was on the board of Elevandi till fairly recently. And now we have created GFTN. I'm now actually part of GFTN, trying to steer kind of the direction here in Northeast Asia, which of course is Japan, but also includes Korea and Taiwan. We started and so that connects then to what we're going to talk about, but we started with the Japan FinTech Festival 2 years ago, and that is now known as the GFTN Forum Japan.
Excellent. So let's talk a little bit about Japan, right? And I'm going to start with the start question, which most of us outsiders have, is, Japan has a history of association with innovation, leading edge application of technology on the way of life and commerce. But ask me an outsider like this, and it kind of feels like Japan kind of missed the sort of fintech train, right? Or at least the initial fintech train, right? Having said that, give us your view on the Japan fintech scene, the way it is today, and how it's sort of come over the last decade. So, kind of bring us to make us a little bit more familiar with what's going on in Japan today.
It's a very good question. Unfortunately, to do it justice, we should probably plan a series of podcasts on that. And it's one of the things actually should be doing.
We might do that. We might actually do that in Japan. Who knows, right?
It is something that is on my bucket list because it's a really interesting story. But if I go back 35 years ago and before I came to Japan, Japan was actually a very early innovator in the financial industry. At that time, of course, the word fintech didn't exist, but it did a lot of automation in the 80s. Taking out complexity, it removes checks from processing. It built a online settlement system. It did a lot of things specifically to oil, Japan's industrial complex by providing very good rails specifically for corporate transactions. Those rails, of course, still exist today, and those rails have become a little bit rusty. And so forth. But it's very important to understand that Japan had addressed that a long time ago and kind of was okay for a while in that. On the retail side, a little bit of a different story there, but basically overall there was no burning fires in terms of doing things that in other countries, like we go to the US, check processing, all these things, this just don't exist here. So this is important to understand that Japan was an early innovator. Japan, came out with ATMs, 24/7 cash recycling. It invented the Felica chip. It invented QR codes. It did a lot of things that were, pretty much ahead of its time. The thing is that let's call it the second wave of innovation, the current fintech wave. A lot of that has kind of run into maybe the legacy of yesteryears, very complex infrastructure, very hard to change. And so Japan started its fintech journey about 10 years ago. I'm actually here at FinoLab. This is the first kind of incubator space that was founded at the time. Really started that journey. And when you innovate in fintech space, you innovate within the country you are and the regulatory environment you are. Japan is a very large country, very strong industrial complex, therefore a very mature financial system, right? So it's not like we're building new stuff. We already have all of it. Now, how do you modernize that? And then what are the needs in that? So I think the fintech movement in Japan is, of course, built from the opportunities within what is happening in Japan. And I think there's two drivers there. One is digitization and doing things better with digital. And the other one is deregulation and leveraging that. So these are the two main drivers. On the digitization, Japan has been running behind. We know that. We always laugh about the fax machines, etc. It's reality. But the Japanese government, since COVID, COVID was kind of a wake-up call. Everyone was making too many jokes. But has been set up what is called the Digital Ministry. And that is very much focused on digitizing Japan. And a lot of effort is being put in that, not just in the financial industry, also other industries. But that is one driver that is driving fintech in Japan. The other one is around regulations, right? And, a lot of people think that the regulators in Japan have been kind of backwards or whatever. They actually have not been. They actually been kind of forward. And in a way also kind of, with Sopnendu and Ravi Menon in Singapore driving kind of the Asia fintech thing, there has been a lot of collaboration between Japan and Singapore, and also a lot of inspiration, but also a lot of initiatives here in Japan. Japan has the most forward-looking regulations in digital assets of any country, right? And it also took, various steps in deregulating certain parts of the industry, allowing securities and various things to come together that were separated before. Over-the-counter sales of securities, over-the-counter sales of mutual funds. Now mutual funds can be sold through third-party agents. There's also been an attempt to do open banking, which actually has been one of the challenges in Japan. But there has been a lot of that. So I think that has driven another kind of wave of startups here that are playing into the new regulatory opportunities. Early examples of that are companies like Monex Group I was part of, that is like the late 90s, that is deregulation of securities. But if you look at more recently, you see crypto, you see things in lending space, you see things in insurance. Insurtech is really a big opportunity right now. So if you look at that coming out of COVID, I think there's been a big kind of change in terms of the attitude towards stimulating startups, doing structural, push on digitization, and the government has been very much driving that. And I think that latter part is important. Some people think that if you change something, it has to happen overnight. No country, nothing happens overnight. Japan, same thing. But when I came to Japan, the government was very much in the driving seat with initiatives. That kind of disappeared over, when we went into the slowdown in the 90s. But that is back again. But now the innovation that was old, let's call the old Japan, the innovation was driven by the big companies that we know now, like the Toyotas and Hitachis of the world. That has shifted into startups taking that initiative. And I think that's very important to understand that is driving a lot of the push. And then in fintech, I think it had a slow start, but we're seeing more and more opportunities. And also the technology, if you look back 10 years ago, Japan was, I think, quite behind in terms of thinking, in terms of agile and use of APIs. But that is being caught up with quickly, and now we're seeing much more, kind of synergies between, health and climate, and all these things are happening as well. So we see much more creative startups in that. Now, what's important to mention there is that a lot of people said, Peter, what about startups that are going outside of Japan in fintech? I think it's a bit of an unfair question because you were going to ask that. I hear it all the time. The thing is first of all, you have to change the system here, and you have to ground here. And it's not easy. You have very strong banks, you have very strong credit card companies, very strong merchant lenders, very strong capital markets, etc. You're not just going to walk in through the door and disrupt that. Japan is not a quick place to do those things, but step by step, these things have been happening. But as that happens in the context of Japan, we have not seen a lot of fintech startups that have, or actually very few, that have gone across the border and tried to do something outside of Japan. We have seen some others come in, like Revolut is trying to do, PayPal, and there are some of the well-known names that are entering the market here. But the other way around, we have not seen much of that yet.
So, Peter, I've got some questions, right? So I was fortunate enough to be there last year, right? I spent a week. I obviously got exposed to a very wide spectrum of people. I had some very good conversations with the FSA. I met people from Bank of Japan, a number of the leading banks, some of the insurance companies, obviously met some of the startups which were coming from not just Tokyo, but beyond Tokyo. Obviously met people from the Accelerator Lab. Now, obviously, it was all crunched in a week. So, by no means am I an expert in a week. But there were two or three things, and I'm going to come to some of the soft sites, right, which to me are still as question marks. I'm not trying to say that these are issues, but these are things that I couldn't put my finger on. So, and I'll kind of rattle them out, and I'd love to get your sort of views on it. One was around, I guess there is a cultural context, right, to how the Japanese are, right, in terms of their mindset and so on and so forth. Secondly, having the talent bench, right? And as more and more tech becomes part of fintech, right? With everything which is going on in AI, digital assets, and all kinds of new technologies, the talent bench. And the third element was, and this is very interesting because I think you should be able to answer this question by being an expat who came 35 years ago when Japan was very, very different, I guess, from now. I would imagine it's a lot more open now. It didn't still feel, if I may use that word, as it's a great place to come and visit. Is it that inviting for foreigners to come because of the language challenges, the way of lives and so on and so forth? So what's your take on these softer elements? I don't want to talk about legacy infrastructure and all that stuff, right? We get enough reports.
We talked about it. They're good points. Let me take the second point first on the talent bench. It is a complex discussion. But I'm going to simplify it a little bit, but it gives you kind of an idea of why there's a crunch. You have to understand in Japan, most people will be familiar with the lifelong employment system in Japan, but you have to understand what that meant. In Japan, when people graduate from university, they're basically immediately hired by the big companies. And basically all talent in Japan traditionally has been going to the big industrial complex. I must say, and some of my Japanese colleagues will be angry with me, but most of the talent went into the industry, not so much in the service industry, right? So you saw a lot of the real brains are in Toyota, whatever. But inside banks, etc., the automation and the technology were seen as secondary. And therefore, not a lot of innovation went there. A lot of lawyers went there, but engineers. When I was doing my jobs here, and I wanted to hire engineers, it's extremely hard as a bank to get an engineer, because the engineers say, I'm going to work for Honda, right? So this also has caused this kind of lockup of talent in the big companies. Also meant this talent wasn't available to startups, and that's why startups only really have become a thing over the last 10 years, is because young people have decided not to go for the for this system anymore. If they would, there would just not be supply, right? So this is very important in the sense it's a kind of a new phenomena. But it is taking shape very rapidly. Young people are still being hired by big companies, ask for 1 day a week to do their startup or do something. That's become a commonly accepted thing. Or people are just basically, after 2 years trying to work at a big company, are just basically dropping out very quickly and try to join either innovative companies from outside of Japan that they kind of appeal. But many start their startups. So that is kind of freeing up the talent, so to speak. The other challenge in Japan is I have to be very clear, is that a lot of young people, unfortunately, over the last 10 years plus, have not decided to study technologies. And Japan is known for all its technology. But when I came in the 90s, if you would go to the US, all US universities were full with Japanese students. If you go now, it's hard to find any, right? And that has reflected also here, is that there's just a huge shortage in the tech space in Japan, and I think that can't be filled by the universities. It will have to be filled by stimulating talent to come to Japan. So that is also an opportunity. At the same time, I think for technology companies, Japan needs much more capacity than it can build on its own. So that's a little bit about the talent, and that also, of course, impacts the fintech space, where we need to look for that. I think in fintech you need two talents. One is a financial brain, and another is technology brain. Otherwise, it really doesn't work. But that means for technologists, that's great. But financial experience, it still needs quite some time to build up. You have to really work in the industry to understand how these things work. It is not something you can pick up from a manual. So I think that kind of combination of talent, of financial understanding, the banking system, understanding payments, and then people that understand the technology. Yes, there's quite some gap, and we see that for startups, one of the big things here is how do I find those people, and which I think interestingly and positively, quite a few Japanese startups are quite open-minded about bringing in foreign talent these days, and some startups are like 50% non-Japanese, and that is a big shift also from like 10 years ago, where to the language problem, that was kind of a thing. I think we're kind of partially over that hump, and people are figuring it out. Tools like Slack and whatever make it much easier to communicate. Japanese are much more comfortable writing and reading English than in talking. Not a big surprise, but that I see a lot of good examples of kind of the internationally minded startups, and they tend to be quite successful too. We also have foreign founders that are doing their startup here that have been successful for other reasons, but that's also a drive. Then you talked about, is it easy to live in Japan? You're asking the wrong person. I've been here for 35 years. So.
No, I didn't say it's not hard to live in Japan. Is it hard? Is it easier to assimilate in Japan? That was the question.
But I think the question is more, is it easy to ground here? I think in the past that wasn't that easy. It was kind of hard to get the visas. It was hard to even open up a bank account and so forth. That has been noted. METI and JETRO and other organizations, also local cities, have done quite a bit of work to make it easy. Is it as easy as opening up a company in Singapore? No. Is it much better? Yes. There's also much more government support for startups here. You can get subsidies. Are they as good as in Singapore? Not entirely, but not bad either. And there's much more willingness to say we must make this happen. Also in the fintech space, Tokyo Metropolitan Government is running programs to get startups to Japan. There is something called FinCity Tokyo that is part of that Tokyo government thing. But it's really, I was proactively, looking at Singapore, looking at other, examples where Japan is trying to make up for that. So was it bad in the past? Probably. Is it better now? I think it's much better now. So yes, and of course you need to still do a few other things. Is it easier with language? I think it is easier. It is not perfect, but AI tools, etc., make things a whole lot easier to manipulate. Is Tokyo a very well connected city? It is very efficient to do your business here. Everything works, so that's a big plus.
I totally agree, and I guess that sort of brings us to, I guess, the main event of this discussion, which is part of that showcasing of, the future of finance and technology in Japan is this Japan FinTech Week. And within that Japan FinTech Week is obviously the GFTN Japan Forum, right? So talk to us a little bit about both the Japan FinTech Week, which I think is, if I may say, it's kind of sort of sponsored by the government, right? And then within that GFTN Japan Forum. So talk to us about a bit about both and how do they actually work together?
How does it work, right? So one important thing to for those that are familiar with the Singapore ecosystem, where I think Singapore government takes a very active role and also very much provides a lot of funding to make things happen. In Japan, traditionally, the government doesn't do the funding side, but does organize and stimulate the industry on different ways by bringing things together. So the Japan FinTech Week was launched last year for the first time. And it was launched because multiple players were basically saying that there needs to be a more equal playing field for a number of groups to come together. And the FSA decided to create an umbrella event called Japan FinTech Week, which currently is March 3 to 7. Under which they invite numbers of organizations to come together and do certain events. Now, some of the events are small, could be a 1 hour session. Some events like ours, it's a full week. And so there's a big difference. We're one of the events that is in collaboration with the FSA, where we're actually actively collaborating with FSA in some of our sessions and so forth. And there's basically now a structure for it. Last year, it meant that I think there were in total 12,000 visitors during the week, which was a massive improvement over years before, where it was basically a couple of thousand people that were connected. So I think that's great. That's now going into its second year. There's a little bit more coordination since last year was kind of the first time it was done. We're trying to coordinate a little bit better, so it's easier for people that are coming to understand how it works. So that is the Japan FinTech Week. So FSA, together with the FinTech Association of Japan, is the organizer of that. And then under that, there is a whole series of events. So if you go to FSA homepage for Japan FinTech Week, you will find all the events there that are running. There's a few events that they're kind of co-organizing, other events they're basically encouraging it. And that is a great thing because it will bring a lot of people together in that week. So if you come to Japan, there's a lot of things to choose from and meet a lot of the key people in the industry. So that is that. That is the Japan FinTech Week. Then in that, we're running GFTN Forum Japan. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. What is GFTN? GFTN is basically what was Elevandi, what was the Singapore FinTech Festival, is now called Global Finance and Technology Network. It is I would say, a logical progression of all the work that MAS has been doing over the last 10 years into a new structure that focuses on bringing people together, bringing platforms that MAS build together, but also bringing know-how and skills together in an advisory structure that collectively is there to help other ecosystems like the ecosystem in Singapore to prosper. Out of that, GFTN Forum Japan is kind of our fintech festival here. Last year, it was called the Japan FinTech Festival Japan. So some of you will remember that. To confuse you, we have renamed it to GFTN Forum Japan. But it is coming out of that. I co-founded it 2 years ago together with my colleague Takeshi Kito, my younger brother here, so to speak, and that was the starting point. So last year we did that really kind of for the first time at scale, and this year we're going to do it kind of. Last year was kind of the POC. This is kind of the MVP. We're going to bring it out in a bigger format and really kind of echoing all the DNA from the Singapore.
So give us a bit of a flavor of what's happening. I think it's a 4 or 5 day event, right? It's from the 3rd to the 7th, right?
Yes.
Give us a bit of a flavor. Give us some highlights about what.
Some highlights, right? So we're running a number of, I would say, tracks, running out a number of locations for that. The first 2 days is kind of what I would say is kind of main conference days. We have have the global leadership stage where we cover a number of themes from payments to AI to the things that keeps us busy, where we bring global leadership and Japanese leadership together to talk about that. But of course, an angle towards Japan in that, and what's happening in Japan, but also for our Japanese audience, what is happening outside. In parallel, we'll run what we call the Insights Forum. For those of you who have been to the Singapore FinTech Festival, that is one of our signature dishes, as I always call it. This really brings the public and private sector together, curated by academic moderators, very well prepared, really deep, in-depth discussions, but also kind of digging things out, how we're going to, how things are evolving, what is the future going to look like. So that will run in parallel. I think we have around 15 roundtables, roughly in that session, spread out over 2 days, including sessions that are co-curated with the FSA and so forth. So that's the second thing. So on day 1 and 2, that's what we're running. On day 2, we're running a special track called the Asset Management Forum. This is something, because Japan has a very strong capital market and asset management side, we decided to focus on it specifically. There's a lot of interest from foreign investment into Japan. Japanese banks and other financial institutions are very actively investing outside of Japan, specifically in Southeast Asia. We're going to talk about those money flows. What are the challenges? What are the opportunities? We're going to get the big PEs of the world. We're going to get the big asset managers to talk about that. For those of you that are interested in that space, this is a unique opportunity to see global and Japanese leadership talk about these topics. We're going to run this track at the Tokyo Stock Exchange Hall. It's an epic location. This is the historical Tokyo Stock Exchange where we're going to do that. So for those of you who are coming, have not been there, this is a great kind of ambience to do that. So that is day 2. Day 3 and 4, we're going to shift the location to where we were last year. Last year, we did this at a shrine. Many people say, how did you do that? This shrine is unique. It has a conference center built in because the shrine is dedicated to success in business. And in Japan, shrines are actually quite innovative. They're innovation centers. If you go to a lot of shrines, you will see there's all kind of entrepreneurial things happening on the site. And this shrine has taken it to the next level. And so, Japan. And so we're going to focus there on day 3. We're going to focus on digital assets. We have a very big stage dedicated to that. The CEO of Binance is going to be there. We're going to have Circle. We're going to have Solana. We're going to all the key players in the digital asset world.
SBI is there. Yep.
SBI and so forth are going to be there. This is co-curated with MAS and JFSA together. We're going to have a lot of discussions around, Japan, but also global. As we know, the digital assets are back. What is the role of Japan in that, and so forth. So expect a very packed program on day 3. In parallel, we're running a separate track for what we call future tech. Other people call it deep tech, but this is really the intersect between finance and technology. And we're going to, of course, talk about AI, quantum, but also cybersecurity and infrastructure. We're having our very famous professor here in Japan is Professor Murai. He's called the father of the internet, but he's also been the guy who put most of the cables in Southeast Asia on the seabed, and we're going to talk about the importance of financial infrastructure as well. So that's day 3. Day 4, we're going to go into what we call Founders Day. For those of you who've been to Singapore FinTech Festival over here last year, really all about startups, all about investors. Of course, a lot of developments happening in the funding space. We're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about why Japan doesn't have a lot of unicorns. How can we, what are the issues there? How is that going to change? We're going to talk about many other things there. And of course, we're going to run our signature event, which is Founders Peak, where we put some of the best and most inspiring founders on the stage to talk about what they learned as a founder. It's not a pitch contest. It's all about what they learned and so forth. And we're going to have a nice combination of Japanese founders and overseas founders come together for that. In parallel, we are also running our investor hours. Very important to notice this. If you were at Singapore FinTech Festival, this is something we do together with Carta. We're bringing together investors, VCs, and so forth, and startups in a matching program where we try to have meaningful discussions between capital and startups as well. So if you're a startup, make sure you sign up for that. If you're a VC, make sure you sign up for that. It's going to be a unique opportunity to check out Japanese startups, check out overseas startups, and for investors, vice versa. So that is running in parallel on that day as well. I'm quite sure I forgot a few things, but the most important thing is
there's a lot going on. There's a
there's
lot going on.
And so forth. So if you look at it from a distance, it really brings a lot of the elements that we as GFTN bring in the Singapore FinTech Festival, but then much more focused on a leadership, so much so less as a expo event and so forth. However, we do have an expo space, so important. We do have an area where we're going to have about 30, 40 booths where we specifically tailored towards startups to showcase. It's not the massive thing that we do in Singapore, but it's really to showcase towards Japanese companies what you're up to. And we still have a few booths available, so if you're interested, do call us right away.
Okay. Peter, conscious of time, last question. I'm beaming in from the Middle East. You're sitting in Japan, right? I have a number of banker friends, number of asset management friends, right? You've obviously covered the startups and the investors, so I'm going to park them aside, right? If I'm a leading banker, a banking executive, if I'm a leader or a leading executive at an asset management, investment banking, a wealth management firm, why should I come?
Very good question. Multiple reasons. First of all, I think the GFTN Forum in Japan is the event to bring the entire finance and technology world in Japan together with the global audience. There is no second or parallel to that. It's really unique what we're doing. It is also designed for networking. A lot of networking opportunities that are organized on the sidelines. It's also the Japan FinTech Week, not only GFTN Forum, so there's a lot of things happening there, but for executives, this is a great opportunity to meet your counterparts in Japan. The event itself is, the state's language is in English, which is kind of not common here.
It makes it easier. Yeah, agreed with you.
Makes it much easier to kind of absorb it. Everything is translated high quality into Japanese real time, so the audience Japanese audience can fully follow it, and vice versa. But it is really a bilingual environment to be in. It is a leadership focused. Last year, we had about 65% of our attendees were C-level or senior government officials. So it's really.
I can vouch for that. I was there.
You were there, right? I mean, I don't think you will find any opportunity like that where it is so easy to reach out to people here in Japan. And, a lot of people know Japan is hard to kind of do that type of networking. So I think that's a real major reason to come. Of course, we have curated a number of topics to really focus on where is Japan. A lot of people want to know where is Japan. Japan geopolitically is becoming much more important in what is happening in the world. Japan is also a major, major investor in our world. So I think for investor, banks, government, etc., there's a lot of reasons to go and be part. We try to create a lot of topics I think that a lot of people are asking questions about. You can see the leadership talk about that. You can participate in those discussions. The roundtables are a great opportunity to really deep dive and really try to understand certain topics better, but also network, of course, at the roundtables as well. I think it's also a great opportunity to basically say, what is your Japan strategy? Should you have one? And I think you should have one. I think Japan. Some people last year we said Japan is back, right? When we were at the thing, and I think Japan is back. I've been here for 35 years, and kind of the dialogue that Japan is in lost decades, blah blah blah. I think we passed that now. This is really the new decade for Japan, and I'm saying that with being a skeptic myself, but I see real changes that put Japan back on the map, and this is a great moment to be part of that and to draw your own conclusions in a very efficient way.
Yeah, no, I love that. You have one of the themes which is underpinning the program is called building corridors, right? And I think that itself is an outreach, right, from Japan. I had Ushida-san, who's the chief fintech officer of JFSA, on the show with me. He was actually with me in Riyadh late last year when we had the 24 FinTech, which was something which is sort of sponsored by the regulators there. I could see the outreach, right? And I think from my personal perspective, there's a great opportunity. Let's be honest, it's one of the largest economies in the world, right? It's got a massive population base. It's got a mature financial services system. It's got, if I may use the word, assets and cash to invest overseas. Yes, so far the focus has been Southeast Asia, but that doesn't stop those relationships to be forged further to the West, right? And the
By the
Middle
way, I
East.
mentioned Southeast Asia specifically because, of course, Japan has invested in Europe and the US and so forth. But their focus is not to invest only in Southeast Asia, but also expand their businesses and really build things in Southeast Asia, which is
Well,
very
we have
important.
startups in this region where Japanese banks have invested. So
Yes.
it's not unusual.
Yes.
And if I may add to it, awesome on the cultural and heritage side, right? Tokyo is, it's a great city to visit. And let's not even start talking about the food because we'll need another 30 minutes. And I know you organize a crawl, don't you?
We do. No, so we don't have to promote Tokyo, so that's the good thing. But of course, Tokyo is an amazing, vibrant city. It's a food culture. There's music culture. Actually, at the GFTN Forum, one of our things we do is every day we start with a unique musical performance to highlight the cultural context. But yes, we're going to have a bar crawl for the first time. I think nobody ever has done it in Tokyo. But we're going to, next to where we are in FinoLab, there's a big area in the financial city here that has a number of restaurants around it. We're going to rent that out for one night, and everybody who's coming, free-flowing drinks and a lot of fun. And of course, a lot of networking at the same time. Every night we have networking events planned. That is there. I just wanted to go back to the corridor things you talked about, financial corridors. We're literally here at what is called in Tokyo the new financial corridor. But this street where we're on, Eitaidori, is about 2 kilometers long. That basically has 80-90% of the financial industry basically is based here. Super efficient. It's like in Singapore, you have the financial area is also very efficient. This is the equivalent of that, and we want to celebrate that. Bank of Japan is on this street. You have the Tokyo Stock Exchange. I'm here in FinoLab next to. Our building is Mizuho, SMBC, and Mitsubishi have all their headquarters just literally next to our building. So it's very, very efficient. But also financial corridors across borders, specifically the India-Japan corridor, the Singapore corridor, the Korea corridor. We're going to talk a bit about these new emerging corridors that are becoming more and more important, also capital-wise. And then, of course, we're going to talk about virtual corridors, which is, let's talk about CBDCs, cross-border tokenization, all these invisible things that we're building across the planet as well. So that's the theme for this year. And I think when you come here, you can take a stroll and kind of absorb, the richness of the financial industry here.
Done. So, Peter, I'd like to thank you. I'd also like to give the event a shout out. So it is the 3rd to the 7th of March, 2025. It's in Tokyo. But that doesn't stop you staying on either side of the weekends and making some side trips to whether it's Kyoto, Nara, or, copious number of places where you can travel.
Great for skiing.
Great for skiing. I hopefully will be there, or at least I'm planning to be there.
We expect you.
I look forward to it, and I'll encourage everybody else who sort of tunes into this show from wherever they are in the world to consider going. There's obviously the GFTN website where they can get on and get more details. They can follow Peter on LinkedIn, Takeshi Kito on LinkedIn, myself, and obviously Swapnendu Mohanty himself. So there's all kinds of promotions going on in terms of tickets, passes, participation, so on and so forth. I'm pretty confident it's going to be bigger, better, and I guess more interesting, more fun, more interesting this year than it was last year, and we'll build on everything from last year.
Yes.
So thank you for coming on to the show.
Arjun, thank you very much for having us, and see you at the GFTN Forum Japan, March 3 to 7.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.